the alien princess kept screaming until the human gave her this. Part 1. Captain Laura stood at the docking bay doors and waited for the most important guests her ship had ever received. The Starward Hope was a diplomatic vessel, built for peace rather than war. Today it would host the delegation, and the treaty they hoped to sign would give humanity access to 3 new star systems. Laura had prepared for months. She had studied customs, memorized proper greetings, and made sure every crew member knew the importance of this meeting. Nothing could go wrong. The airlock opened with a soft hiss. 4 tall figures walked through, their skin a pale shade of blue that seemed to shimmer under the ship's lights. They were beautiful in a strange way. They had large eyes that reflected light like polished gems, and their movements were graceful like dancers. Ambassador Rand led the group. He was old by standards, with silver markings along his face that showed his high rank. Behind him walked Counselor Axe, a younger diplomat with a suspicious expression that never seemed to change. But it was the smallest member of the group that caught Laura's attention. Princess Hai was young, perhaps equal to a human teenager in development. She had the same blue skin as the others, but her eyes were wider and more curious. She looked around the docking bay with wonder, taking in every detail of the human ship. Laura smiled at her, and for a moment the princess almost smiled back. Commander Daniel stepped forward and performed the traditional greeting. He pressed his palm to his chest and bowed his head slightly. The ambassador returned the gesture, and everyone relaxed a little. The formal welcome had begun without problems. Laura led the delegation toward the conference room where the ceremony would take place. The halls of the Starward Hope had been decorated with both human and symbols of peace. Crew members stood at attention as they passed, showing respect to their important guests. Everything was perfect. Then the screaming started. It came from Princess Hai. One moment she was walking quietly behind the ambassador. The next moment she stopped, opened her mouth, and released a sound that made Laura's ears feel like they were being stabbed with needles. It was high and sharp and seemed to vibrate through the walls themselves. Crew members grabbed their heads in pain. Even the other flinched at the intensity. Ambassador Rand rushed to the princess and spoke to her in their language. His words were soft and calm, but they had no effect. The princess kept screaming. Her eyes were wide with something that looked like fear, but also something else that Laura could not name. Counselor Axe tried to touch her shoulder, but she pulled away and the screaming grew louder. Laura shouted orders over the noise. Medical teams rushed to the scene. Security officers cleared the hallway of non-essential personnel. Commander tried to guide the delegation to a quieter area, but the princess would not move. She stood frozen in place, that terrible sound pouring from her throat without stopping. Dr. Grace Perry arrived with her medical kit. She was a small woman with kind eyes and steady hands, the best Dr. Laura had ever served with. Grace approached the princess slowly, holding up a scanning device. They watched her with distrust, but they were too desperate to stop her. After several minutes, Ambassador Rand managed to speak over the noise. He explained that the princess had entered something called a distress resonance. It was rare among their people, usually triggered by extreme fear or pain. But he did not know what had caused it. The princess had shown no signs of distress before this moment. Grace studied her scanner readings with a frown. She tried to share her findings, but the ambassador was focused on attempting calming techniques. He began to chant in a low voice. Other members of the delegation released pheromones from glands in their necks. They adjusted the lighting in the hallway to match frequencies that were supposed to bring peace. Nothing worked. If anything, the princess screamed louder. An hour passed. Then, too, the princess's voice grew hoarse, but she did not stop. Crew members took turns wearing ear protection and monitoring her condition. The formal ceremony was forgotten. The treaty was forgotten. Everyone focused on one question: how do they stop this? Laura pulled Commander aside. This was becoming a disaster. If they could not calm the princess, they might see it as a failure of human hospitality. Worse, they might blame humans for causing the distress somehow. Counselor Axe was already whispering accusations. He suggested that hidden human technology was hurting the princess. He demanded that they search the ship for weapons. The situation was falling apart. Months of careful preparation were being destroyed by something no one understood. Laura watched the princess and felt her heart ache. Beneath all the noise and chaos, she could see that this was just a young person in terrible pain. Whatever was causing this, it was real. The princess was suffering. Grace approached Laura with her scanner. She spoke quietly so they would not hear. She had found something in her readings. The princess was experiencing severe sensory overload, but there was more. Her brain patterns showed signs of extreme emotional distress that had been building for a long time. This was not a sudden attack. This was something that had been growing inside her, waiting to explode. Laura asked what could have caused such a thing. Grace shook her head. She did not know enough about biology to be certain, but she had a theory. She wanted to ask the ambassador some questions, personal questions about the princess's recent life and experiences. Before Laura could respond, the princess collapsed. Her screaming stopped as her body fell to the floor. The sudden silence was almost as painful as the noise had been. Ambassador Rand cried out and rushed to her side. Grace was there a moment later, scanning and checking vital signs. The princess was alive but exhausted. Her body had simply given up. She lay on the cold floor of the human ship, far from her home, surrounded by strangers who did not know how to help her. Ambassador Rand looked at Laura with desperate eyes. His proud manner was gone. He was simply a guardian who had failed to protect his charge. He spoke slowly and carefully. He said that if the humans had any way to help the princess, any method at all, he would allow them to try. But he warned her that failure would have consequences. The Empire did not forgive those who harmed their royal family. Laura understood. She looked at Grace, who nodded. They had one chance to save this mission and maybe save this young princess from whatever was destroying her from inside. Grace said she knew what to do, but first, she needed to explain something about humans that they had never considered. The alien princess kept screaming until the human gave her this. Part 2. They moved the princess to the medical bay. She was still unconscious, her breathing shallow and uneven. Ambassador Rand refused to leave her side. He sat in a chair next to the bed and watched every move that Dr. Grace Perry made. His eyes followed her hands like a hawk watching prey. Grace worked quietly and carefully. She attached monitors to the princess that would track her heart rate and brain activity. The body was different from a human body in many ways, but some things were universal. Fear showed the same patterns in any species, and the princess was drowning in fear. Counselor Axe stood in the corner with his arms crossed. He still believed the humans had caused this problem. He spoke to Ambassador Rand in their language, his voice sharp and angry. Laura did not understand the words, but she understood the meaning. He wanted to leave. He wanted to take the princess back to a ship where she would be safe from these primitive beings. But the ambassador shook his head. He was a practical man beneath his formal exterior. He knew that moving the princess in her current state could kill her. Whatever was wrong with her, it had to be fixed here. Grace called Laura and Commander to the side of the room. She showed them her scanner readings and explained what she had found. The princess's brain was overwhelmed with stress hormones. Her neural pathways were firing in patterns that matched extreme loneliness and isolation. In human terms, she was experiencing the worst case of homesickness that Grace had ever seen. Daniel frowned at this. He asked how that was possible. They traveled the stars just like humans did. Their people spent months or years away from their home worlds. They should be used to this kind of separation. Grace said that was exactly the problem. She had researched culture after the delegation arrived. Their species bonded through formal rituals and shared duties. They did not express emotions the way humans did. When a felt sad or lonely, they were expected to perform certain ceremonies to process those feelings. But the princess was young. She might not have learned those methods yet. Or perhaps the method simply did not work for her. Laura thought about this. She remembered being young and far from home for the first time. She remembered the ache in her chest that never seemed to go away. Back then, she had her mother's voice on recorded messages and a photo of her family beside her bed. She had friends who understood what she was feeling. She had comfort. What did the princess have? Laura walked over to Ambassador Rand and asked him some gentle questions. How long had the princess been away from her home world? What kind of support had she received during the journey? Had anyone noticed signs of distress before today? The ambassador answered slowly. The princess had left her home 6 standard months ago. This diplomatic tour was meant to be an educational experience. She was learning how to represent her people among other species. It was a great honor for someone so young. Laura pressed further. Had anyone talked to the princess about her feelings? Had anyone asked her if she was happy or scared or lonely? The ambassador looked confused by these questions. He said that royal members of the empire did not discuss such things. Emotions were private matters to be handled through proper rituals. The princess had access to meditation chambers and harmonic therapy. She had everything she needed. Laura exchanged a look with Grace. They both understood now. The princess had been given every tool except the one she actually needed. No one had simply asked her how she felt. No one had held her hand and told her that being scared was normal. No one had given her permission to be a frightened young person far from everything she knew. Counselor Axe overheard this conversation and became angry. He accused the humans of suggesting that culture was inferior. He said their methods had worked for thousands of years. The princess was simply weak, a failure who could not meet the standards expected of her rank. Grace stepped forward with fire in her eyes. She told the counselor that the princess was not weak. She was brave. She had held her pain inside for 6 months without complaining. She had tried to be strong for everyone around her, and her body had finally said enough. This breakdown was not weakness. It was the price of pretending to be fine when everything inside was falling apart. The room went silent. Ambassador Rand stared at Grace with an expression that was hard to read. Perhaps he was angry. Perhaps he was ashamed. Perhaps he was seeing the truth for the first time. The princess stirred on the bed. Her eyes fluttered open, and immediately the screaming began again. It was softer now because her throat was damaged, but it was still that terrible sound of distress that hurt to hear. Ambassador Rand jumped up and began the calming rituals again. The chanting, the pheromones, the light adjustments, but Laura could see that he was doing them with less confidence now. He was beginning to doubt. Grace approached the princess slowly and spoke in a soft voice. She told her that everything was going to be okay. She said that feeling scared was normal and nothing to be ashamed of. She promised that they were going to help her feel better. The princess looked at Grace with those large, gem-like eyes. For a moment, the screaming softened. Something had connected just for a second. Then Counselor Axe pushed forward and demanded that the human doctor step away from the princess. He would not allow primitive earth medicine to contaminate royalty. He began preparing a sedative from his own medical kit. Laura made a decision. She ordered Lieutenant Marsh to escort the counselor out of the medical bay. Was a tall man with broad shoulders and a gentle face. He rarely had to use force because his size alone was usually enough. He guided the protesting counselor through the doors and sealed them shut. Ambassador Rand watched this happen but did not object. His eyes moved from the door back to the princess, who had started screaming at full volume again. The sedative would only hide the problem. It would not fix it. Grace asked for permission to try a human approach. She explained that humans had developed ways of helping young people cope with fear and loneliness. These methods were simple, even primitive by standards, but they worked. The ambassador asked what kind of method she meant. Grace smiled and said she would need to show him. But first, she needed to find someone on this ship who understood what the princess was going through. She knew exactly who to ask. The alien princess kept screaming until the human gave her this. Part 3. Lieutenant Marsh was not the person anyone expected to save the diplomatic mission. He was a security officer, trained to handle threats and protect the ship. He was good at his job, but he had never thought of himself as special. He was just a man from a small town in Ohio who missed his family every single day. Dr. Grace Perry found him in the corridor outside the medical bay. She asked him a strange question. Did he still have the stuffed bear that his sister had given him before he left Earth? Felt his face turn red. The bear was a secret. His youngest sister, Emma, had pushed it into his hands the day he shipped out. She was only 8 years old and could not understand why her big brother had to go so far away. She had given him her favorite toy, a small brown bear with a missing eye and worn fur, so he would not be lonely in space. Had kept it hidden in his quarters for 2 years. He would never admit it to anyone, but some nights he held that bear and thought about home. It made the darkness of space feel less empty. Grace did not laugh at him. She did not tease him or make him feel foolish. She simply said that she needed his help and his bear. A young person was suffering, and he might be the only one who could reach her. Followed Grace to the observation lounge on Deck 7. The crew had transformed it into a soft, quiet space. The harsh lights had been dimmed. Comfortable chairs and cushions had been brought in. The large windows showed a view of distant stars that seemed to glow with gentle warmth. Princess Hi was there, still screaming but weaker now. Her voice was almost gone, but the sound still came from deep inside her chest. Ambassador Rand sat nearby, looking defeated. He had tried everything his culture had taught him, and none of it had worked. Entered the room slowly. He held the stuffed bear behind his back, feeling slightly ridiculous. He was a grown man, a security officer, about to offer a toy to an alien princess. This was not what he had imagined when he joined the fleet. Grace guided him forward and whispered instructions. Do not make demands. Do not try to fix anything. Just be present. Be patient. Let her know she is not alone. Sat down on a cushion a few feet away from the princess. He did not speak at first. He just sat there, breathing slowly, looking at the stars through the window. The princess's screaming continued, but she turned her head slightly to look at this new human who had entered her space. After a long moment, began to talk. He did not talk about the treaty or her duties or the importance of diplomatic relations. He talked about home. He told her about Ohio, about the fields of corn that stretched to the horizon in summer, about the smell of his mother's cooking on Sunday afternoons, about his 3 younger sisters who drove him crazy but whom he loved more than anything in the universe. He talked about Emma, who cried for a week when he left and who still sent him drawings of the family with a big empty space where she'd be standing. The princess's screaming softened as she listened, her large eyes fixed on his face. She did not understand every word, but she understood the feeling behind them. This human was homesick too. This human knew what it felt like to be far from everything you loved. Brought the stuffed bear from behind his back. He held it gently, like it was something precious. He told the princess about Emma and how she had given him this bear so he would have something soft to hold when space felt too big and too cold. He said it might seem silly, but sometimes the smallest things help the most. Ambassador Rand leaned forward, looking at the bear with confusion. He asked what the purpose of such an object was. Did not have toys like this. Their children were given educational devices and training materials. Comfort was supposed to come from inner strength and proper meditation. Shrugged and said that humans were different. Humans needed to touch things. They needed to hold something real when their hearts felt heavy. A stuffed animal was not logical or practical, but it worked. It reminded you that someone loved you enough to give you a piece of themselves. The princess had stopped screaming. Her voice had finally given out, but there was something else happening too. She was staring at the bear with an expression that recognized. It was longing, pure, simple longing for comfort that she had never been allowed to have. Moved a little closer, he held out the bear toward her. He did not push it into her hands. He just offered it, letting her choose whether to take it or not. For a long moment, nothing happened. Ambassador Rand seemed ready to protest, to say that royalty should not accept primitive human objects, but something stopped him. Perhaps he saw the look in the princess's eyes. Perhaps he finally understood that all his proper methods had failed. The princess reached out with a trembling hand. Her blue fingers touched the worn fur of the bear. She pulled back like she had touched fire, then reached out again. This time she took it. She held the bear awkwardly at first, not sure what to do with it. Showed her how to hold it against her chest, where she could feel its softness against her heart. He told her that she could squeeze it when she felt scared. She could talk to it when she felt alone. It would not judge her or expect her to be strong. The princess looked at with tears forming in her large eyes. Could cry, it seemed. The tears were silver instead of clear, and they glowed faintly in the dim light of the observation lounge. She spoke her first words in many hours. Her voice was rough and broken, but the words were clear. She asked if he ever stopped missing home. Shook his head honestly. He said no, he never stopped missing home, but he had learned to carry home with him in small ways, in a stuffed bear from his sister, in photos of his family, in memories that he held close to his heart. Home was not just a place. Home was the people who loved you, no matter how far away they were. The princess nodded slowly. She hugged the bear and closed her eyes. For the first time in days, her body relaxed. The tension that had been building inside her for 6 months finally began to release. Grace smiled at and put a hand on his shoulder. They had done it. They had reached her. But the princess still had more to say. The alien princess kept screaming until the human gave her this. Part 4. The observation lounge became a sanctuary over the next 12 hours. Stayed with the princess, sitting quietly beside her as she held the stuffed bear against her chest. She did not speak much at first. She was too exhausted, too raw from everything that had happened, but understood that sometimes presence was more important than words. Ambassador Rand watched from across the room. He had refused to leave, but he kept his distance. Something in his expression had changed. The proud diplomat who had arrived on the Starward Hope was gone. In his place was an old man wrestling with uncomfortable truths. Dr. Grace Perry checked on the princess regularly. Her vital signs were improving. The stress hormones in her brain were dropping to normal levels for the first time in months. Whatever was doing, it was working. Captain Laura visited briefly to check on the situation. She looked at the princess holding the worn teddy bear and felt a strange emotion rise in her chest. This was not how she had expected to make peace with the Empire. But peace took many forms, and sometimes the smallest gestures were the most powerful. As the hours passed, Princess Hai began to talk. Her voice was still damaged, barely above a whisper, but leaned close to hear every word. She told him about her home world, a planet called Prime where the oceans were silver and the forests sang with bioluminescent light. She described the palace where she had grown up, surrounded by servants and teachers but rarely by people who simply wanted to be with her. Listened without interrupting. He nodded when she paused and made soft sounds of understanding when she struggled to find the right words. This was something he had learned from his mother. Sometimes people did not need advice or solutions. They just needed someone to hear them. The princess talked about her training. From the moment she could walk, she had been prepared for her role as a representative of the Empire. She learned languages and protocols and the proper way to stand and speak and eat. She learned that emotions were weaknesses to be controlled. She learned that a princess must never show fear. But she was afraid. She had been afraid from the first day of this diplomatic tour. Everything was strange and unfamiliar. The ships did not smell like home. The food tasted wrong. The stars outside her window were in the wrong positions. She woke up every night reaching for her mother, only to find empty darkness. Asked if she had told anyone how she felt, the princess shook her head. She said that showing weakness would shame her family. Her mother had sent her on this journey with instructions to make the empire proud. Crying or complaining would prove that she was not worthy of her royal blood. So she had pushed everything down. She smiled when she wanted to scream. She stood tall when she wanted to collapse. She pretended to be the perfect princess while something inside her cracked a little more each day. Understood this pain. He told her about his first year in the fleet. He had been young and scared and determined to prove himself. He worked double shifts and never complained. He told everyone he was fine even when he felt like he was drowning. And then one night, alone in his quarters, he had broken down completely. He cried for hours while holding that same stuffed bear she was holding now. The princess looked at him with surprise. She asked if other humans had seen him cry. Said no, not at first. He had been ashamed just like her, but eventually he learned that pretending to be strong was not the same as being strong. Real strength meant admitting when you needed help. Ambassador Rand cleared his throat. He had been listening to everything. His voice was heavy when he spoke. He said that in culture, seeking help was seen as failure. A leader must be self-sufficient. A leader must never burden others with their problems. Turned to face the old diplomat. He said, with respect, that sounded like a lonely way to live. He asked the ambassador if he had ever felt the way the princess felt. Had he ever been far from home and aching for something he could not name? The ambassador was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. He said that many years ago, during his first diplomatic assignment, he had experienced something similar. But he had done what was expected. He had meditated and performed the rituals and forced himself to continue. He thought he had overcome the weakness. Grace spoke gently. She said that he had not overcome it. He had buried it. And buried things did not disappear. They just waited until they could not be contained anymore. The ambassador looked at the princess, who was watching him with those large, silver-streaked eyes. She had never seen her guardian show any emotion at all. Now she saw something new in his face, understanding, and maybe even guilt. He walked slowly across the room and knelt beside the princess. This was a shocking gesture for someone of his rank. Elders did not kneel before children, not even royal children, but he did it anyway. He apologized to her. He said that he should have seen her pain. He should have known that the old ways were not enough. He had been so focused on protocol and duty that he had forgotten she was just a young person, far from home, surrounded by strangers. The princess reached out and took his hand. She told him it was not his fault. He had only done what he was taught. They had all done what they were taught, but maybe it was time to learn something new. Watched this moment with a warm feeling in his chest. He had come to this ship expecting to protect people from physical threats. He never imagined he would help heal an ancient alien culture, one small stuffed bear at a time. The princess turned back to. She asked him what humans did when someone they loved was hurting. How did they help? What did they say? Thought about this. Then he smiled and said that sometimes they did not say anything at all. Sometimes they just sat together and watched the stars. Sometimes they held hands. Sometimes they gave each other small gifts that said, "I am here. I see you. You are not alone." The princess hugged the bear. She looked out the window at the stars that had seemed so strange and cold. But now, sitting beside this kind human, they did not seem so frightening anymore. She whispered that she wanted to teach her people what she had learned here. She wanted them to know that there was another way to be strong. Put his hand gently on her shoulder. He said he thought that was a wonderful idea, and he believed she could do it. When the princess finally fell asleep, still clutching the bear, she looked peaceful for the first time since leaving home. The alien princess kept screaming until the human gave her this. Part 5. 3 days after the princess stopped screaming, the treaty negotiations resumed. But everything had changed. The formal conference hall on Convergence Point was the same, with its high ceilings and curved walls designed to make every species feel equally important. The delegates sat in the same positions they had occupied before, but the energy in the room was completely different. Captain Laura noticed it immediately. Counselor Axe still looked suspicious, but his hostility had faded. Ambassador Rand sat than before, not with pride but with purpose. And Princess Hai, who by tradition should have been silent during these proceedings, was clearly preparing to speak. Commander Daniel stood beside Laura, watching them with curiosity. He whispered that something was happening. The princess had requested time to address both delegations. This was highly unusual. Young royals were supposed to observe and learn, not participate. The ambassador stood and announced that before they continued with treaty discussions, the princess wished to share some thoughts. He said that he had granted her permission to speak on matters of imperial, a rare privilege that allowed royals to discuss issues affecting the health of the empire itself. Counselor Axe looked uncomfortable but did not object. The princess had the legal right to speak, and denying her would cause more problems than allowing her. Princess Hai rose from her seat. She was still holding the stuffed bear. She had refused to let it go since gave it to her. Laura could see some of the officials whispering about this strange object, but the princess did not seem to care. The princess spoke slowly, her voice still recovering from her ordeal. She said that 3 days ago she had been broken. She had screamed until her body collapsed because she could not hold her pain inside anymore. For 6 months, she had pretended to be strong when she was actually dying of loneliness and fear. The officials shifted in their seats. This kind of confession was unheard of. Royalty did not admit weakness in public, but the princess continued. She said that the humans had saved her, not with advanced technology or clever negotiation. They saved her with something so simple that her people did not even have a word for it. They gave her comfort. They sat with her when she cried. They told her that being afraid was normal. And they gave her this small, soft thing to hold when the universe felt too big. She raised the stuffed bear for everyone to see. Several officials looked away in embarrassment, but the princess held it proudly. She said that for thousands of years, her people had taught that emotions were weaknesses to be controlled. They had built an empire on discipline and duty, and she was proud of what her ancestors had achieved. But she had learned something new from the humans. She learned that acknowledging your pain was not weakness. It was wisdom. It was the first step toward healing. The princess looked directly at Ambassador Rand. She said that even their greatest diplomat had suffered in silence, carrying wounds from centuries ago that had never healed. How many others were doing the same? How many children were crying alone in their beds, afraid to ask for help? The room was completely silent. Laura realized she was holding her breath. This young princess was challenging the foundation of her entire culture. She was incredibly brave. The princess announced that she wanted to add a new element to the treaty. She proposed the creation of a human cultural institute. This institute would not focus on trade or technology or military cooperation. It would focus on emotional education. Youth would learn from humans about coping with fear, loneliness, and stress. Humans would learn from about discipline and meditation and inner focus. Both species would grow stronger by sharing their different kinds of wisdom. Counselor Axe stood up immediately. He protested that this was ridiculous. The Empire did not need emotional lessons from primitive humans. Their culture had survived without such foolishness. The princess faced him calmly. She asked how many had experienced what she experienced, how many had suffered breakdowns far from home, how many had hidden their pain until it destroyed them. She said the Empire kept these cases secret because they were shameful, but shame did not solve problems. It only created more. Ambassador Rand rose slowly. He said that the princess spoke with the voice of the future. He had served the Empire for 200 years, and in all that time, he had seen countless young diplomats burn out and disappear. They were always called weak. They were always blamed for their own failures, but maybe the failure was not theirs. Maybe the failure was a culture that never taught them how to bend without breaking. The ambassador announced his support for the princess's proposal. He said he would recommend it to the Imperial Council with his personal endorsement. Laura stepped forward on behalf of humanity. She said that they would be honored to share what they knew. Humans were not perfect. They made many mistakes with their emotions, but they had learned that connection and compassion made them stronger, not weaker. They would gladly teach this to their new friends. The treaty was signed that day with expanded terms that no one had anticipated. Trade routes were established. Military cooperation was agreed upon. But the most important part of the treaty was the Cultural Institute, founded on the simple idea that kindness was a form of strength. Lieutenant Marsh watched the ceremony from the back of the room. He had tried to stay out of sight, uncomfortable with the attention his role had received. But when the signing was complete, Princess Hai walked straight to him. She held out the stuffed bear, reached to take it back, but she shook her head. She said that she wished to keep it. She would place it in the Imperial Museum as a diplomatic artifact of profound significance. Future generations would learn that this small, worn, imperfect object had changed the course of history. Laughed and told her to keep it. He said his sister, Emma, would be incredibly proud to know her bear had helped save an alien princess. The princess smiled, her first real smile since leaving home. She said she would like to meet Emma someday. Perhaps she could visit Earth and see the fields of corn and taste the cooking of his mother. Promised that she would always be welcome. After all, she was family now. 6 months later, a news broadcast played across the empire. Princess Hai stood before the Imperial Council, holding a new stuffed animal. This one had been made by craftspeople, designed to look like a creature from their own mythology. Behind her, a group of human teachers prepared to begin the first emotional wellness program in history. The princess spoke with confidence and warmth. She said that the humans had taught them a valuable lesson. The smallest gestures carried the greatest power, a soft thing to hold, a patient voice in the darkness, a willingness to sit with someone in their pain without judgment. This is what the humans gave us, she said. This is why they are worthy of our alliance, and this is why the Empire will never be the same. The broadcast ended with a simple image, a small brown bear with one missing eye resting in a place of honor in the Imperial Museum. The label beneath it read, "The gift that changed everything." And across the galaxy, on a ship called the Starward Hope, Marsh smiled and thought about writing a letter to his sister.